Let's be honest, talking about money is awkward. Whether you're doing it in your own language or in English, it always feels a bit uncomfortable. Like, there was a time I could order coffee in English, write full emails in English, but the moment someone asked me about finances, I'd freeze. Budgets, savings, monthly expenses. I knew the words in my head, but I didn't know how to use them naturally. This all started when I moved out for the first time. I was renting a small place, working freelance, and trying really hard not to starve by the third week of the month. You know the drill. And suddenly, everything in life was about money, rent, groceries, electricity bills, budgeting, random late-night online shopping. It was all about managing money, and I had to talk about it in English. Let me tell you how I figured it out, and learned all the vocab that made me feel like I had my financial life somewhat together. So first, I got tired of saying money 100 times a day. I kept repeating it in every sentence. I don't have money. I need money. Money is tight. But I soon realized that native speakers don't talk like that. They use all kinds of phrases that sound more natural and specific, so I made it my mission to learn better expressions. Instead of saying, I don't have money, I started saying things like, I'm on a tight budget this month. Instead of just saying, I need money, I said, I need to save up for rent. And instead of repeating, money is tight, I'd say, I'm trying to cut back on expenses. These phrases sounded way better, and more importantly, people understood me clearly. I even stuck little sticky notes with these expressions on my fridge, just to keep them in sight. Then came the big test, splitting bills with roommates. My flatmate was this super chill girl from London. She'd say things like, wanna split the grocery bill? Or, can you transfer your share of the rent by Friday? I'd just nod and smile, pretending I understood, but secretly, I was Googling the meanings. One time, my roommate said, let's just settle up at the end of the month. At first, I was a bit confused because I didn't know what she meant. I wondered if she was talking about paying everything at once or keeping track of small payments throughout the month. But after a little while, I figured it out. Settling up simply means paying what you owe at the end of the month, instead of paying right away. For example, if she paid 3,000 rupees for groceries and I paid 2,000 rupees for the internet, then at the end of the month, I'd give her 1,000 rupees to balance things out. It made managing money feel simpler, and I got the hang of it as time went on. As I spent more time with her, I picked up everyday expressions like, let's go halves on dinner, meaning, let's split the cost of dinner into 2 equal parts, wanna chip in for pizza? Meaning, do you want to contribute some money towards the pizza? Or, don't worry, I'll cover the cab, meaning, I'll pay for the cab rides so you don't have to. Using these phrases made me feel like I truly belonged in the conversation, instead of just standing on the sidelines. Then came the budgeting phase. I downloaded an expense tracking app and was suddenly faced with all these terms I didn't really know how to use: income, fixed expenses, variable expenses, savings, emergency fund. Here's what I learned: income is the money you earn, whether it's from your job, business, or other sources. Fixed expenses are regular, consistent costs that don't change much, like rent or utility bills. Variable expenses, on the other hand, are costs that fluctuate month to month, such as food, transport, or entertainment. For example, my variable expenses can go up during the holidays, especially on gifts and dining out. I also learned about savings, which refers to money you set aside for future needs, and an emergency fund, which is money saved specifically for unexpected situations, like a medical emergency or car repair. Soon enough, I found myself using these terms in sentences like, "My fixed expenses take up about 70% of my income," meaning, most of my income goes to regular, unchanging expenses. But then, I started coming across other terms that were more directly related to budgeting. For instance, if I found myself spending more than I had originally planned, I would say, "I went over budget." This simply meant that I had exceeded the amount of money I had set aside for certain expenses. On the other hand, if I ended up spending less than expected, I would say, "I'm under budget," indicating that I had kept my spending below the planned amount. There were also times when I had to cut back on certain expenses. To cut back means to reduce the amount of money I was spending in specific areas. For example, I might decide to cut back on eating out or entertainment expenses in order to save more money for other priorities. It felt like a necessary step whenever I realized that I was at risk of exceeding my budget. Another word that became part of my budgeting vocabulary was spontaneous. This refers to something that happens suddenly, without any prior planning. For example, a spontaneous trip refers to a trip that was planned at the last minute, or perhaps an unplanned purchase that wasn't part of my budget. I'd often say, "I went over budget because of that spontaneous trip," meaning that the unexpected spending caused me to exceed the amount I had originally allocated for the month. Initially, these budgeting terms felt unfamiliar and somewhat intimidating. But as I got more accustomed to using them in real life, they gradually became second nature. Managing my finances, once a daunting task, started to feel much more manageable, as I was able to use these terms confidently to describe and assess my spending habits. Then came the scariest part, talking about money at work. I started freelancing, and that meant I had to discuss how much I charge and how I get paid. I had to learn to ask things like, "What's the budget for this project?" which simply means asking how much money is available to pay for the work. It was crucial to understand the budget to determine if the project was feasible for me to take on. Another term I became familiar with was, "I usually charge per hour, but I can also do a flat rate." Charge per hour means I get paid for each hour I work. For example, if I work 5 hours on a project and my hourly rate is 500 rupees, I would charge 2,500 rupees. On the other hand, a flat rate means a single, fixed amount for the entire job, no matter how long it takes. For example, if I agreed to do a project for a flat rate of 5,000 rupees, I would get paid that amount, regardless of whether it takes me 10 hours or 15 hours to complete the work. Once I had completed a job, I would tell the client, "I'll send you an invoice." An invoice is a formal request for payment. It typically includes details like the work done, the agreed upon payment amount, and payment instructions. For example, I might say, "I've completed the project. I'll send you an invoice for 10,000 rupees, which is due in 30 days. These terms were initially intimidating, but as I started using them more often, they became part of my routine. Talking about money, once a nerve-wracking topic, eventually became something I could approach with confidence. Once, someone didn't pay me on time, and I had to deal with something I'd never done before, following up on a late payment. I ended up sending a message that said, "Hi. Just checking in on the payment status for the last project. It's been over 10 days, so I wanted to make sure there weren't any issues on your end." It was a polite way of reminding them that the payment was overdue without sounding too pushy or rude. In freelancing, these kinds of follow-ups are important. You want to maintain a good relationship with the client while also making sure you're paid for your work. I learned that being polite but firm is key when talking about delayed payments. The same thing came up when I had to ask friends to return money they'd borrowed. I learned to do it in a way that felt respectful and low pressure. For example, I might say, "Hey, do you think you could return the 500 rupees sometime this week? It would really help me out," or, "Hey, I was wondering if you've had a chance to send back the 500 rupees from last week." If I wanted to keep it extra casual, I'd go with, "Hey. Just following up on the 500 rupees, can you send it when it's convenient for you?" These kinds of phrases helped me handle awkward money conversations with a little more ease and confidence. After that, I started picking up money slang too, which made me sound even more natural. Like, "I'm broke this week. That means I don't have any money." Or, "She's loaded, she's really rich." Or, "That dress was a total rip-off, it was way too expensive for what it was worth." I also say things like, "Let's eat at home, I'm trying to save some cash." Or, "I blew my budget this month, payday can't come soon enough." Blew my budget means I spend more than I planned, and payday is when I get my salary. So here's what I learned: you don't have to know every finance word. You just need to know the ones that help you talk about your life. Like how to explain what you earn, how much you spend, how to split a bill, how to talk about your budget, and how to ask for your money when someone forgets to pay. And honestly, just practicing in real conversations helps the most. Talk to your friends about your rent, your shopping, your weekend plans, and just try using 1 or 2 new phrases each time. Here's something fun: try explaining your monthly budget in 3 lines. For example, "I earn about 40k a month. Rent takes up half of it. The rest goes into groceries, travel, and pretending I can afford to go out on weekends." Keep it simple, keep it honest. That's how you grow. Alright, that's how I learned to talk about money in English without sounding awkward. Hope it helps you too. And if you've had your own money fails or want to share some vocabulary, tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. See you in the next one.